Hi guys, it's Becky, and we're going to do a bead weaving project today, and it is a project that popped into my head when I opened up my the subscription box from Beads to Live By with the curated collections, because this month, instead of just 8 colors of seed beads, we got 2 colors each of 6/0 seed beads, 8/0 seed beads, 11/0 seed beads, and 15/0 seed beads. And I was like, you know what? I want to do a project where we use all 4 of these sizes, and we're just going to make like a bangle or a bracelet. This is an example I used, not with the stuff from the curated bead box, or not curated bead box, curated collection, but from some beads in my own stash, just to give an example of what we're going to be making. These are some 6/0s that I have bought and rebought over and over again, because I have used this particular color of seed bead in so many of the beaded lace shawls that I've knit, because 6/0 seed beads are the best size seed bead to use for beaded lace if you are using fingering weight yarn. So I have lots of 6/0 seed beads, and that's the size of seed bead that I was used to using before I ever started doing bead weaving. And that's going to come into play later when I start telling you some stories. I have these fuchsia beads that I've used in another project recently, so I used those as well. And then these beads, I can't actually remember where I got them, but they are like this vitriol color, and they are gorgeous between the turquoise and the fuchsia beads. And then I had these other ones, they're gold lined rainbow aqua beads, and they were just a really great bead to have with this. So what I'm going to be doing with you guys is we're going to be taking some of these beads from the curated collection. I've got these like turquoise opal or aqua opal 6/0 seed beads, and we're going to use those. And I'll actually pour out a few more of these. Then we've got these kind of warmer rainbow lined, well, not lined, they are unlined seed beads. These are some of the 8/0s that came in that curated collection. And then these dark aqua matte finish 11/0s that are one of my favorite colors ever. So we're going to be using those as well for this project. And then these coral lined 15/0s. Like, it's kind of a peachy coral color right there, and I think that these go great together. They're definitely giving me a Palm Beach kind of a vibe with all of those colors together. So we're going to be using those for this, and the project that we're doing is going to be tubular or spiral or peyote in the round. It's peyote stitch, but we're going to go around and around in a circle, and we're just going to make a little rope with it, but it's a bubbly rope. It is a bubbly, bobbly bracelet. So for this, I'm going to show you how to do it 2 ways. I'm going to show you how to do it this way, where you end it with some glue-in caps, and I'll also show you how to sew both ends together to make a bangle. So the bangle is the one that we're going to be using here, and then I'll just do an example at the end of all of this to show you how to glue in the end of your bracelet with that. So before we get started on this, I am going to talk a little bit about thread, because one of the reasons why this took so long for me to start filming and for it to come to is this is the second time I've filmed this. This is the second time that I've started this project with y'all, because the first time I started this and I started filming it, I was using this new thread from Wildfire, the Beadle Wildfire Ultra. I thought, hey, this will be a fun project to try this thread out with and see how I like it and how it works. And then maybe we could do a little mini review at the end of this, and maybe I would have positive things to say. I really, really, really wanted this to work out. So I had started doing it, and then this thread broke like twice before I even got to the part where I was going to show you guys how to add thread. And I wasn't doing anything with it that I wasn't doing with the OneG that I was using to figure out how many rounds of peyote I liked between each of these and how many beads to have on each round to get the look that I wanted. Because I did a lot of bead weaving and then taking the beads apart, and then bead weaving and taking the beads apart, and I used OneG for that, and it held up perfectly. It was great. I could tug on it to snug the beads into their place, and I'll show you how and why we do that when we get to it. It was great. I used the same thread multiple times for multiple passes, taking beads off, putting them back on, and it held up great for that. This one, I used Dragonthread for this one, and again, the thread held up. You could tug on it. It went through the tight beads, the 15-ohs. It went through the thick beads, and you know, in and out. And there were several times that I made a mistake and I had to go back and redo it while I was making this, and the Dragonthread held up just fine. It was great with it. So for this to break twice when I was doing the exact same thing with it as I had been with the Dragonthread and the OneG, and all I was doing was just, you do peyote and you do a little tug after a row to help your beads settle into place, and this broke. So first of all, that's a lie. First of all, that's a lie. And second of all, I'm still a little bit mad at this, so I don't think I'm in a good place to do a good review of this. I also am a big fan of finding the appropriate use for a tool. You know, if all you have is a hammer, everything's going to look like a nail. And this is a tool. And so this project is probably not the right use for this. There may be a good use for this particular thread, and most likely that good use is going to be something that requires a little more suppleness in your thread, like fringe earrings. I have a feeling this is going to be great for fringe earrings. So I'm going to give it some time before I do like an actual review. I think I might do a whole thread video where I compare thread in a couple of weeks after I've had time to use this in some other projects. But that's again why it took so long for me to get this started, and why I had to re-film it, is because I started using this. The thread broke on me twice for a simple project, and so I'm not going to be using it, and I will not recommend it for this project. What I am going to use instead is some 4-pound Fireline, because Fireline is my workhorse, man. I can use it for just about anything. Dragonthread is another one that I will reach for and go to all the time. But I wanted to grab the 4-pound Fireline for it because because it's a bangle. I don't want that same silky suppleness that you get with the Dragonthread. I need it to be just a little bit firmer, but I need the diameter to be small enough for at least 3 passes through some of our 15-ohs. So that's why I'm going to go with the 4-pound Fireline, and that's what I'm going to be using for this. If you have OneG, like I said, it works great. You can use that. I didn't try it with the Miyuki thread that I've got. I am not as familiar with that as I am with like Fireline and the Dragonthread. Like, I've been using Dragonthread since I started. That was the first beading thread that I ever used, and I use it quite a bit for a lot of things. But yeah, so I think this 4-pound Fireline is going to do me just fine for this project. We're not going to have it break on us anytime when we do it, and so we're gonna get that started. But I just wanted to take a minute to talk about the thread and why it took so long to get started on this project and where we're going with it. So I've got my thread, and I am using a lighter thread, and I've got a lighter background. So what I'm going to do, and this is something that I figured out After, I don't know if you remember the other project that I did that I was trying out this with like this hard felt that I did not enjoy beading off of. But to make it easier for you to see this, I figured out that I can just turn my bead mat around over here to this side like this, so that I have this, but then I've got the dark background so you guys can see, whoop, where'd you go? My thread. You'll be able to see my needle. You'll be able to see what I'm doing a little bit easier and a little bit better, especially when I'm using these lighter colored beads and this lighter colored thread for this. So I'm just gonna stick these beads over here so that I can get to them, because I do not like beading off of hard surfaces. There's like this tactile feedback that just, it's like nails on chalkboard for me. Like the way it feels in your head when you hear that, it feels like that to me when I'm picking up beads, or when I'm rolling them around. It feels like that in my hands and in my brain. So that's one of the reasons I don't like beading on hard surfaces, and I like the soft surfaces here for that. That's a me thing. You might be totally different. You may not have that issue. I also have, like, I don't know if you guys ever watch like ASMR videos or anything like that, but like those give me anxiety. Like, they do not relax me. I do not like hearing things cluttering around. It's a weird thing. And for someone who makes videos where my beads fall into like the little sections of my organizers, and some of you have said how much you like hearing that sound, like for me to admit that, like, I don't enjoy that much. I mean, I like it when I'm doing it, but I don't know that I would enjoy it as much to actually watch it. It's a weird thing to confess, right? For that. But anyway, so the amount of thread that I pulled off, and this is it, all of it right here, is a wingspan's worth. And I will never work with more than a wingspan's worth, because one of the great things about bead weaving is you can always add more thread. And I'll be showing you how to do that when we get to that point in this project that I need to add more thread. I'll show you how to finish off the thread that you're using and then add some more. And when we get to that point, we can do that. As far as how you measure a wingspan, if you hold your spool in one hand and the end of your thread in your other, and just spread your arms as far apart as they'll go, that's your wingspan, and then you can just cut off there for that. How I measure an arm's length is I hold this up to my chest and then stretch my arm out to the side while I'm holding this. That's how I measure an arm's length. Because oftentimes with smaller projects, they'll tell you to measure an arm's length of thread. So that's just my measurements for that. I prefer arm's length and wingspan versus like 3 feet or 6 feet or 5 feet or something like that. It's so much easier for me to do that. So 5 feet of thread or 6 feet of thread is just way too much, unless you are someone who has a wingspan of 6 feet, and then that's probably just sufficient for you. I'm going to be using a wide-eye beading needle because I like the ease with which I can thread my needle. You can use an English beading needle because we're going to be making multiple passes through some 15-0 seed beads. I would use the smaller beading needle, not the very smallest, although that would work just fine, but one of the smaller on the other side, as far as diameter and eye size goes. But I am, as I said, going to be using this. So, because of the ease that I have with this. All right. Now, to start it off, I am going to pop a stop bead on the end of my thing. I've got one of these beads that I picked up off the floor earlier. It's just I mean, any bead will do, as long as you can go through the bead and then go back through that bead in the same direction that you already went to make a circle around the outside of the bead, one side of the bead, with your thread. And that just makes a stop bead so that the beads that go on here, if you're swinging your project around, it's going to keep them from flying off. When it's on this, you can slide it up and down. This doesn't keep it from sliding up and down. It just makes it so your beads won't fall off. And you want to have it easily removable so that when you go and use the other side of your thread after you've made some of your stuff this way, you can pull it off easily without having to have a big production about it and have it be hard to do. So that's all I'm doing, is putting the stop bead on. And I'm leaving, you can leave, I don't know, it's about 6 inches of tail. That'll be sufficient. All I'm going to do with this is when I go start working from the other side, I'll weave that in and then start a new thread to do that. And I'll show you that when we get to that point. So peyote in the round is, you know, maybe you've done peyote flat. Maybe you've never done any bead weaving before. It's entirely possible that this is a new concept for you. And I say that because the very first bead weaving project I ever did was peyote in the round. And it was difficult for me to wrap my head around the concept of the step up because I had not used beads as small as this before. I was more used to beads this size. It was really hard for me to see where I was, to read my beading, to see where I was in the pattern. And the pattern was very well written. It was really good instructions. It was something that I was like, I should be able to follow this. Why can't I follow it? Why am I not getting it? And for the most part, it was because I was using tiny beads. And I had never done this before, and it was totally new to me, and I didn't understand the concept of stepping up. So like when you have the first row of peyote, is the first 3 rows are the hardest. So we're going to start with our largest beads for the first 3 rows, for the first 4 rows actually, and then step down gradually to the smaller rows. And that should hopefully, if you're new to this, that should hopefully help you get that concept a little bit better, because it's going to be a repetitive project, which will reinforce how you do it. But the first 2 rows of peyote are all of the beads that you pick up at the beginning. You pick up, you've got your thread running through your beads, and you pick up all of these beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. Let's do even count. So you pick up your first row, your second row, your first row, your second row, your first row, your second row, your first row, and your second row. That's your first 2 rows of peyote, because on the next pass, these are going to be offset, and you'll have your first row down here, and then your second row up here, and it's the act of putting on the beads from that third row that offset your first row. And it's a concept that was difficult for me to get because it wasn't explained in the pattern. I think a lot of times when we're teaching concepts, there's this assumed knowledge. You assume that people who are your audience will already have that knowledge, will already have that familiarity with these concepts. And I used to be a technical trainer, and that was a danger that I had, was having that assuming that the people sitting in my class already knew how to do these things. And not being able to look at it and say, if I was a beginner, what would I need in order to do this? And even to understand that everybody has different experiences, and my level of beginner might be completely different from your level of beginner. So that's how the first 3 go. You've got your first strand of string from when you first picked up your things, and then the second row you've got another strand where you've strung on your 3rd row and then sewn through the bead on your 2nd row. So you have both of those strings that go through both of those, and that's how it makes this like crenellated edge. And that's where I was saying you give it a little tug to help the beads settle into place. So these would settle into their place there. And then when I do my 4th row, I would sew through my 3rd row bead and add my 4th row. Sew through my 3rd row bead and add my 4th row bead. And that's how that goes, and it builds it up that way by plopping it into that space. And this is flat peyote. This is just going straight across. That's how it is. And when you get to the end, you turn it around and you go back the other way and you add that next row. When you do it in the round, when you get to the end of this row, you then have to go back to the beginning of that next row, right? So when you do that, you're going to be going through that first bead that you added again. That's the step up, and I'll show you, I'll demonstrate it when we do that. So stepping up to the next row is a concept that it was hard for me to get. And the only reason I did get it is because after 4 or 5 times of cutting apart the work that I was doing in this project, which it was probably a project that was beyond the ability of a beginner, but I was very determined to do it. Just background, that project, when I first started, my very first one, it was a square cut crystal, and it was bezeling that crystal using peyote stitch in the round. And then the corners were using herringbone stitch. So for somebody who had never done either peyote or herringbone and having to figure out like which row were they, what part of the row, where and how, and it was a mess. But I redid everything after cutting it apart with the tiny beads. I grabbed some larger beads and I followed those instructions with the larger beads, and it all made sense. That's why we're going to start with some larger beads, and we're going to go ahead and make this project and do this together. All right, so that's the little background bits for where we're going and why we're doing this. So to make this first 3 rows easier, I'm going to use 2 different sizes for that first row. This is going to be row 1, and it's going to be the 8/0 seed beads. And then row 2 will be the 6/0 seed beads. And I'm going to pick them up at the same time, one after each other. Well, alternating. So row 1, row 2, row 1, row 2. So basically I'm going to be picking up 1 8/0, 1 6/0, 1 8/0, 1 6/0, and I want 4 of each size on my needle. So 8 beads total. 4 8/0s, 4 6/0s. I'm going to pick all of those up off my needle, and I'm going to just start them sliding down so they don't fall off my needle while I'm talking to you. And I'm going to go ahead and move them down next to my stop bead, and you can see this is why we have a stop bead, so that if I'm swinging my project around, if my dog is like, oh hey, I'm going to get my toe caught on what you're working, it's not going to have the beads go flying. So now that we've got these on their needle, this is my row 1, this is my row 2. My row 3 is going to be more of the 6/0 seed beads. So I'm going to have 6/0s sitting right on top of these 8/0s in that crenellated area. Jill Wiseman calls them the sticky outie beads, which is a perfect description and something that I am definitely going to use in this video and for the rest of my life, actually, because it is actually like the perfect description. So I'm going to make a circle. I had this thread coming out of this. I'm just coming back down and coming up from the bottom of this whole column and going through all of these seed beads except for these final two at the end, because that's going to be the start of my next round. I just want to make this into a circle so it's easier for us to see what we're doing. And this first round is not going to really make a column. It won't be until we get to like maybe the third round or a few more beads that they'll start popping into place and where we want them to be. But for right now, this is where we're ending. So I am coming out of my second row bead. I am not going to be sewing into any of my first row beads. These 8 O's are my first row and the 6 O's are my second row. I will not sew into any of these, so I'm going to be skipping all of these on my way around. Every time I skip a bead though, I'm going to be adding a bead. So I want to add a bead that's going to sit between both of these blue beads and on top of this bead in that space. So I'm going to pick up my third row bead. I'm going to start that by skipping the first row and sewing into my second row. And again, different colors, different size beads, but larger beads are going to help you figure out where you are right here at the beginning, because this is the most fiddly part of this whole project, I promise. And if you can get past the fiddly part, the rest of it's a breeze. I mean, it is also a little bit fiddly when we get to the 15 O's because they are very tiny beads. So it's not sitting directly on top of it yet because we haven't turned it into a column, but it is between these two beads and it is sitting up there. So that is my third row so far. I'm going to keep going around until I have added another 6-0 bead between each of these 6-0 beads, but I'm going to be skipping the 8-0 beads all the way around because I'm not sewing into my first row. I'm only sewing into my second row and placing the beads on my third row. First 3 rows of peyote are always the fiddliest. So I'm going to do the same thing again on this one. Pick up a seed bead, skip the 8-0, sew into the 6-0. And one more time with feeling. Pick up your 8-0, or sorry, 6-0, skip the 8-0, and sew into your 6-0. And now I've added 4 beads for that row. That means I am finished with that row. And I need to step up to the next row. So I'm coming out of my row 2 bead. I'm just going to put my needle through that first bead that I added for row 3. And once I'm coming out of there, I'm ready to continue my next row. So this is perfectly fine if it looks like this. This is normal. Don't be alarmed if this doesn't look like a tube yet, because it doesn't need to look like a tube yet. And yeah, you can see some of the threads between here. It will pop into place as we add more beads, I promise. Some people find it helpful to have like a skewer or something that they shape that they sew around when they're doing tubular peyote. I find it's just one more thing to fiddle with, so it doesn't help me. But if it helps you to sew around it, to have it be something that you go around when you're doing this, then by all means go ahead and stick one of those into here as you go around. I find it fiddly. It's distracting to me. It's one more thing to have to deal with, so I don't use it. But if it helps you, give it a try. If it doesn't help, go back to doing it this way. I think some things help some people, some things help other people, and we are all different people, so we have different things that we like, prefer, and enjoy. All right, so I am coming out of this bead right here. This is my third row bead. I've got my first row, my second row, and my third row. I need to add a bead right here between this one and the other one. You can kind of, if I pop it up on top, you can see it being that sticky outy bead. It's a little hard to see because it's round instead of flat, but I need to pop another bead between these two so it sits on top of this one, because this one's on top of there. And again, I'm using my 6/0 seed beads for this, so I'm going to pick one up and sew through that seed bead. I'm skipping the lower bead between these two. And you see how it kind of fits into place? It'll fit into place better when we get our next row going, and it's already starting to kind of pop up into a cylinder without me even having to like move or adjust it very much. All right, so I've got that one over there. This is way too, this 8/0 needs to go underneath that. There we go. So now I've got this space here that I need to fill with another 6/0 seed bead. So I'm going to sew into that next sticky outy bit. This is another reason why I started with the 8/0s as my first row, is so that you can see that difference. That is not the bead that we're going to be sewing into for this row. It's not. It's this one up here, because that was our 3rd row bead that we added. All right, and here we are again. I'm going to be skipping this one, and yeah, the thread is a little loose on this. This is why being able to pull and tug a little bit on your thread is important for this project. And that's why I'm not using a thread that breaks when you tug on it. Anyway, moving on. I have opinions with a capital O, and like, you know, it's wild to me that I have opinions, that I've been doing this long enough to have preferences and opinions now. All right, so here we are. This is going to be the last one that I add. I've already added 4 for that. I'm going to be adding 1 more. And it's a little bit hard to see, but I'm going to be sewing into this one. I'm skipping this bead, sewing into this one. So I need to pick up my 6/0 first, and then going from this one to this one, skipping over that. And that finishes up this row, and I'm going to try really hard not to catch my thread on things on my desk, because that just kind of everything. everything. All right. Tighten things up a little bit. This is where giving it a little tug helps the beads settle into their place. And again, it's not a hard tug, it's just a little tug, just like that, to get that settled. So now I'm going to step up, because I've finished adding all 4 of these sticky outy beads, and I want to be coming out of a sticky outy bead for my next row. So this is the step up. I'm coming out of this bead that I finished sewing into, and just that bead that's up and to the left, I'm going to sew right into it without picking up another bead. You will mess up your project if you add another bead before you step up. Sometimes you can sew through both this bead and your step up bead at the same time. I'm doing it in 2 steps just for this beginning part to make it easier for you to see where I'm doing this and what parts of this I'm doing it. Now my pattern is 3 rows of each size. So I started with the 8s and the 6s because I wanted us to be able to see where we were in the pattern using the bigger beads. But now I'm going to move to some smaller beads because the way that with peyote you count your rows is by taking both columns that are stacked up on top of each other. And right now I have 4 rounds or rows of peyote, and I have 3 of those with my 6/0s. So I need to add another 3 rows or rounds with 8/0s. So I've got my bead coming out of the sticky outy bead, and I'm going to be placing an 8/0 between each of these 4 sticky outy beads by skipping over this bead that's below it. I'm going to pick up an 8/0. I'm going to sew right here into this bead. And that's by the way, that's why I never work with longer than a wingspan, is because that's just too much thread to be wrangling at a time. You'll get it tangled, it'll catch on everything, and it'll be hard. So there we go. You see how it's kind of nestled between those two? I'm going to do the same thing here. I've got my 8/0, and this is my sticky outy bead. I'm going to put this over here, and it's going to be hard for us to tell when you go from a larger bead to a smaller bead, which is the sticky outy bead, if they were the same color. But luckily for us, we can tell by the size what the next is going to be. We can just do that. So it's just going to spiral around when we do this. Then again, changing color may also help with the concept of the step up. So I am almost done with this row. I just have one more 8/0 to add. And I'm going to go ahead and sew into this next bead here. And that finishes that round. And see what I mean about doing a little tug to help it pop into place? That's all you're going to do. Just do a little tug, help it pop into place, and see how it is now more of a cylinder. That's what we want. Now I need to step up. I need to go from this round up to this round. So I'm just going to put my needle right through there. And now I'm ready to add 4 more beads. And I'm going to add those beads in between each of these 8/0s. So I'm going to skip the 6/0s and sew into my next 8/0. And it's not really sticky outy because it's a smaller bead. So it nestles very nicely in between these two. Can you guys hear Natalie? She is shaking her head. She likes to shake her head when her ears get itchy. Her ears get itchy when the weather changes. Here we go. And one more. And I'm going to be doing this all the way around for the rest of this work. I just want to go through all sizes so you get a good idea of what it's supposed to look like when you have a little bit of a tangle from your there we go. It caught my tail thread. That's what that did. There we go. I didn't mean for that to happen. All right, so there we go. These are 2 rows or 2 rounds of the 8/0 seed beads. And you can see from the side, you've got some that nestle down into the 6/0s. You've got some that sit up above. So those are our sticky outy beads. So what's the next thing we do? We step up. Just go right up there to our sticky outy bead. I think once you have like more than 3 people calling it with the same term, it becomes a technical term, right? So I think sticky outy bead is the technical term now. We can have consensus, I think. So now I'm going to do another round with my 8/0s, because again, when you count how many rounds or rows that you have, it's just for 2 rows. You count how many, so that's 1, 2, 3 of the 6/0s, and it's 1, 2 of my 8/0s. So that's a way for you to tell where you are in this pattern and in the repeat. It's just to count how many rows you have. So I have 1 more row or round of 8/0s to add, and I'm going to be placing them between each of these 4 that are sticking up out of the top. So I'm going to pick up another 8/0 and put it right here between these 2. by sewing into the next one. That's where that goes. I'm going to place this one there by sewing into the next one. Boy, if I can, like, gross motor control, or is it fine motor control? I don't know. And this is just peyote in the round, and there's nothing magic about it. It's how it works, how it goes. The fiddly part is figuring out where you are in the pattern, where you go next, and the step up. And so I like to, if I'm going to be putting it down for any reason, I like to at least step up before I set it down so that I know what I'm going to do next. So this, I finished all of that round. I went through that last bead from the second round of 8-ohs, and I'm ready to step up into that third round of 8-ohs that I just added. So this is the part where, you know, if my son needs my help with something, if somebody's, my dogs need to go outside, I will say, okay, I'm stopping right here. I can set this down, I can walk away, and then when I come back to it, I can look at it and I can count my columns to see where I am. And if I already know that I left it coming out of that step up bead, I'll know that I'm ready to start my next round. And I don't have to figure out how many more I need to add or anything like that. It's just, it makes it a little bit easier. So this is basically our first bobble, our first bubble done. We are here. I'm going to be adding the progressively smaller beads. We're going to get down here, and it's going to be a little bit harder for us to see. So I am going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for these other beads because they're smaller, and I'd like for you to be able to see what we're doing. So I'm coming out of this bead. It's our sticky outie bead right here at the top. This was the first one in our third row of 8-ohs, and I'm going to be putting an 11-oh between this one up here and this one up here. So I'm going to pick up my 11-oh, got that on my needle, I'm going to sew into the 8-oh, and it kind of pops right into place. Here's my next sticky outie bead over here, so I'm going to pick up an 11-oh and sew into that. And this is, I mean, this is what you're going to do for like the whole bangle, for the whole bracelet, until you get to the length that you're going. Is you're just going to be sewing these beads all the way around until you get to the end. All right, so I have one more 11-oh to add before I'm done with this round. Pop it right there between this one and this one. And now it's time to step up. And again, I'm just giving it a little tug. Always pull on the thread, not on the needle. Always. Give it a little step up. And now I can add another round of 11-ohs. One more round of 11-ohs. All right. I think I was out of shot. Okay, so I did another one here, and I'm getting ready here to finish this round. You can see here, and this is the part where it can get a little bit confusing, because you're like, but wait a minute, this one's the sticky outy one. That should be the next one that you sew into. But no, that's not the one that you sew into. You want to just do the next bead after this one. Like you're coming out of this bead that you just sewed into. You're going to skip this bead, and it's the next bead right after it. And even though there's the sticky outy one up here, we're not sewing into that one yet. Not until we finish this round. And like I said, you could try angling it so it goes through both at the same time. I'll try doing that on the next round to show you how that works, because it does actually work pretty well to do both of these beads at the same time, especially because you're not adding a bead between completing the round and stepping up. You're just going through both of those beads basically. So now I've got my sticky outy beads over here. I'm going to be doing my next round of 11 O's, and it's my third round. And again, I spent a while like figuring out what I liked for my preferences for how many rounds of each size seed bead I liked for this bauble bracelet. If you want to do fewer or more of any of these, feel free, because like, you know, make it yours. Have fun with it. I just liked this and this number of, and this amount of rows of these sizes for aesthetics. I was like, you know what? I like the look of this a little bit better than some of my others. Some of the others looked really cool too, but I liked this one for my purposes. And that's why that's the one I'm teaching you. So, and it makes it a little bit easier to keep it consistent between each size too, to say, okay, we're doing 3 of these and 3 of these and 3 of these, instead of like 1 of these and 2 of these and 3 of these and 5 of those. Because I did try that. That actually looked really cool too, but that would have just been an added level of complexity. And if I'm trying to make this beginner friendly, then I want to keep the complexity to a minimum. So here we go. Let's take a look at this. We're finishing this up. I am coming out of this bead. I'm going to skip this bead. I'm going to sew into this bead. But then I'm also going to want to step up to this one. So I'm going to pick up my next bead that I'm placing, my 11-0. I'm going to sew right here into this guy. And then I'm going to try to angle my needle. And you can do it, you might not do it, but I'm going to try and angle it so it's coming up out of that next bead so that I can step up and finish all in one fell swoop. And bloop. Just gave a little bit of a tug. You can move it with your fingernails if you need to help it find its place, but they pretty much lock into place where they're at, and you can see it's making more of a rope. We've got kind of a little volcano going on here where it's big and then it gets smaller. It's going to get a little bit smaller than that on our next round, because I have 1, 2, 3 rounds of 11 O's, and now I'm going to be putting in my 15 O's. So let me grab one of these little guys, because we just stepped up in one fell swoop here, so we don't have to do that again, but I am going to skip that next bead and sew into the next one after that. It's my next sticky outy bead, and pop that little 15-0 right there into place. And this is going to be easier for you guys to see too, because I picked some beads that have some really good contrast. So like you're not going to be lost and be like, wait, which one's the 15-0 and which one's the 11-0? It's very easy to see which ones are which. Might be a little bit harder if you were using like all silver beads or all one color versus the other. This is another really fun project to be able to do with different colors of beads, and to really explore and play with color. That's what I did with this one. I was playing with color. And these are some really, really fun colors. All right, so I don't know if you guys noticed, I went ahead and finished my round and stepped up all in one fell swoop by going through that last 11-0 and this 15-0 all at the same time. Now this 15-0 has 2 strands of thread already going through it, and when I go through on my next pass, that'll be 3 strands. And that's one of the reasons why, like, I might avoid using really thick beading thread for this, because especially like Wildfire is a pretty thick thread. You wouldn't want to use like 8-pound Fireline. That's also thick thread. It just gets difficult after like maybe 2 passes with some of those thick thread through a 15-0. And yeah, so that's one of the reasons I wanted to use the 4-pound Fireline instead of some of the others, is just to make it a little bit easier for us to get through that 3rd pass of thread in one of these. And it's also, when you're weaving your thread in, we're going to be sewing down to where the 15-0s, because the 15-0s don't have as much space in them, they'll hold the thread tighter, so it'll be less likely to undo. So I'm going to be finishing this up with my 3rd pass of thread through this specific bead here. And then stepping up into this 15-0. And then I'm going to do my 3rd round of 15-0s, because I've got 2 rounds. And it is a little bit harder to find the sticky outy bead because it's sitting there between the larger beads, but you can figure it out by jumping over that next bead and sewing into the one after it. So I'm jumping over this next bead and sewing into that one, after I pick up a bead, of course. So the pattern is 3 6-0s, 3 8-0s, 3 11-0s, 3 15-0s, and then we're going to go back up until we get to our 6-0s. So we'll do another 3 rounds of 11-0s after I'm done with this, another 3 rounds of 8-0s, then another 3 rounds of 6-0s, and then we'll go back down to 8-0s. All right, this is the last round. I'm finishing this up, and I'm just angling it so that I can go through my last 15-0 and then step up for my next round, all in the same go. And you don't have to do it that way. You can do it in 2 separate steps. And often, if I can't angle my needle correctly, I will go ahead and do that, because it makes it a lot easier than trying to like dig it around and try to do it that way. All right, so as I said, after we're finished with the 15-0s, we're going to step back up to the 11-0s. And keep going all the way around. And yes, this does make it a little bit easier to see which ones are the sticky outy beads when they are bigger than the ones below it. There's that last 15-0. This can be a little bit hard and tricky to get into if it's right up next to the other one. There we go, my last 15-0, and I'm stepping up into my first 11-0. All in one go. And give a little tug to help them settle into their places. And do your next round. So I am going to be doing this until it is long enough for it to fit around the widest part of my hand, because I'm doing this as a bangle instead of a bracelet. I want it to be able to fit my hand. Like most people, like the widest part of your hand is going to be right here where your knuckles are. But for me, the widest part of my hand is right here where my, I got meaty hands. I was a competitive powerlifter for many, many years. I don't compete any longer, but I still have ridiculously strong hands. There's a lot of muscle in here. So having it fit around that part, that's the thickest part of my hand, because I want to be able to roll it on and roll it off. It will be looser than this because it's going to have more segments than this. So if you don't like a bangle being loose and like jangly, you might do it as a bracelet instead. So for bracelets, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of my bobbly sections, and each of them ends with some 15-ohs. You can't see them because they're inside these glue-in ends, but they all end with that. And this fits great on my 7.5-inch wrist. It's actually just a little bit loose on my 7.5-inch wrist, so with an extender chain, it would probably fit on an 8-inch wrist just fine. If you have a smaller wrist, you might do 6 segments instead of 7. But for the bangle, size-wise, 9 segments is what I'm going to be going for. And so when we get to that part, I'll show you how to sew both of those ends together. Like I have this raw end and then I'll have another end. We'll join them. It's pretty easy. It's just zipping it up like a zipper and your thread. But yeah, when we do that, when we get to that point, I'll show you how to do that. I'll also show you how to, when you run out of thread and you need to add more, I'll show you how to do that. But for the most part, it's just going to be repeating this, going around, adding your beads in between each of your sticky outy ones and stepping up and doing 3 sections of 6, 3 sections of 8, 3 sections of, or 3 rounds of 11s, 3 rounds of 15s, and then 3 rounds of 11s, 8s, and 6s. And I'm just going to go ahead and go with you all the way until we add our first round of 6s. Just so you've got some reference of what it should look like when you are adding those larger beads. And I stepped out and stepped back so you can see my wrist a little bit better, but also because I don't think we need the close-up of these beads anymore. I think you guys get the concept at this point of putting the beads in between, figuring out when you need to step up and how to do that. So there we go. I've got my 3 rows or 3 rounds of 11-ohs. So now we're going to move on to our 8-ohs like this. And by about midway through this, you're going to get really fast at picking up beads and sewing through the next one. Because it's a lot of repetition, but it's a good way to learn how to do this. And then, you know, there's a lot of peyote, spiral peyote, peyote in the round tutorials and patterns out there. You could use beads that are all the same size and do a pattern in them and make a little rope with that for necklace or bracelet. That would be a fun project. but I just wanted to do the baubles so that we use all 4 sizes in the same project. It's pretty fun for me, actually, making these baubles, and I hope it's fun for you too. All right, here we go. So now it's making more of an hourglass shape because it goes in and then it's going to come out. And I'm going to do my first round with the 6/0 so you can see what that looks like. And then I am going to let you go so you can keep working on it, keep going around, and you can meet me back here when you're ready to add more thread, and I'll show you how to do that. And also, usually when I need to add more thread, I'm going to make sure that I have enough thread. Like if I have about 8 inches of thread left before you decide to do that, that's when you want to stop. You don't want to stop like when you only have 2 inches of thread, because that's just too far. You've gone too far. So adding more thread, wait, stop when you have about 8 inches of thread left, because then we'll go ahead and weave that in and then weave in some new thread and keep going. And you really shouldn't have to knot anything on this because we're going to be going back and forth and also going through some of the 15-0s, and they'll help hold the thread pretty securely. So there we go. I'm going to keep going around here, add 2 more rounds of the 6/0s, and then we'll go down in size and then up in size and then down in size and then up in size. And then when it is long enough, I'm going to do it when I have 9 of these baubles. Then we'll sew it together and we'll have a bangle. But I will join you back here when it's time to add more thread so I can show you how to do that. All right, so let's add some thread. And I added thread about here after doing like the first 3 segments, and I added some thread and I got to about here. And one of the reasons I wanted to wait to do my add thread video instead of doing it here was because 2 things. One, it was at night and I have so much better lighting during the day, even with my lighting equipment here on my desk, and I just wanted to do it in the daytime. But also because this is almost to the point where if you're doing it bracelet style like this instead of bangle style, this is almost how long you're going to want it for like a 7.5 inch wrist or an 8 inch wrist. When you do that, you would do one section shorter if you've got shorter wrists, by the way. So I'm just going to preface this by saying, like, most of the time if you've got like a pattern that you're doing in spiral peyote, like if you're doing a Cellini spiral or if you're doing something else like that, you'll want to add your new thread before you weave in your old thread. This specific pattern, where it doesn't really matter each round where you start or where you end with, you can do it in any order that you want. So I'm going to do weaving in this end first before we add the new end in, or the new thread in. And I'm just going to end it here. You know, I said you wanted about maybe 8 or 9 inches of thread to be able to maneuver and go through here. I'm just gonna scooch in a little bit more so you guys can see what I'm doing with this. So I've got it going through here. I went ahead and stepped up to that next step. So if I was continuing, I just add a whole other row of my 6/0s up here. I'm also, there's a purpose for me leaving these 6/0s in place, and we'll get to that later. And that's just going to be for when we close up the bangle. Using the larger beans will make it a lot easier to zip up that end, because when you do this sort of thing, you can stop working at this end and start working at the other end and you'll be just fine. So I'm actually going to be leaving this end to zip up to when I finish everything, and I'll be working from this end. But I am also going to show you how to finish up each end before you glue it into the thing. And I'm going to start that from this side. So, so first things first, how to weave in your thread. It's coming out of here. So instead of going up into the next bead and sewing down, I'm just going to go back down into that next bead. This will help lock this bed into place, so it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to loosen up. It's not going to go and do anything. And now to get my thread so that it doesn't come undone, so that this doesn't drift apart when you're wearing it, I'm going to be weaving back through my work. And weaving back through your work is following the thread paths. You can see this thread here from this 6/0 into this 8/0. So I'm just going to follow that thread path through here. And most of the thread paths are either into the ones on the outside and then middle and outside and middle on the top ones or the bottom ones. You can see how it goes, kind of a boop, boop, boop like that. So you're going to go through, and now that I'm coming out of this one, I could go up into this one or this one, but I want to work my way down to the smaller beads with my thread, because there are two things that are going to lock this thread in place so it doesn't go anywhere, so it doesn't drift apart. You could do a knot. I knot most of my work, but for this type of project, I don't. And that's because it's easy enough to make sure that it's not going to, no pun intended, it's not going to go anywhere. And so there's still so much room in here. These threads could slip out really easily. So I want to move down to these smaller beads where there's not as much room in the bead holes. And that's where most of my locking into place is going to be going. So I'm still following that thread path coming out of this bead down into this next. And now I'm going to switch things up. Instead of going into this one and following the thread path, I'm going to reverse directions. I'm just going to pop into this bead right next to it, and you always want to go from the bead next to it down there. I don't want to come out of this bead and then go into this one. That'll leave a thread people are going to see, and it's going to be a little bit messy. You can still see that, but it's going to blend in. It's going to be less visible than if I went from this one over here all the way back to this one. You always want to, when you reverse, go into the bead next to it on that column. So now I'm going to follow this thread path and go along, and I'm going to try to go maybe about halfway around this work, just going through these 11/0s before I get to the 15/0s. Right. And now I'm going to reverse it again. I'm going to go in another direction, and I'm going to jump from this 11/0 to this 15/0. It's right next to it in the column. So it's the tension of going in different directions that's going to lock it into place, but also having the thread go through these smaller beads where we've already got some multiple thread passes, and the tension of those being there. It's going to help hold this thread into place, and it's not going to go anywhere. Like, I can pull on this right now, and this row will not loosen because we're weaving this in just fine. All right, and I'm just going to do one more pass around here, going through, and I'm mostly staying on when there's two of the 15/0s. I'm staying here on the right side because when I turn this around one more time, I'm going to go through these middle beads and the ones that are on the left. So here's another spot where I'm going to turn it around. The middle beads will have most of the multiple passes. The outer beads won't, but it allows us to do that. And you can do this as much or as little as you want, as long as you have like 3 switchbacks where you change direction and you end with your thread in the 15/0s. Then you're bracelet is not going to fall apart. As long as you're using thread that isn't going to break on you. So once that's done, I'm just going to cut this really close to here. I can come back with like a thread burner or something if I can see any of the little threads sticking up. I can't really see a thread sticking up, so it's going to be fine. So that's how you weave in your old thread. And I am just going to, because you can work from either end of a tube like this, I'm going to switch back to working from this end. And you can save this for the end of your bangle and zip it up that way. And that's kind of what I was intending a little bit, was to zip up an 8/0 section. But I'd like to go ahead and show you where you want to end your bubble and bobble if you're doing it like a bracelet, and also just show you how to start working from your starter end and work that way, because that's another part of when you do the bracelet, you're going to want to do it that way. So just removed my stop bead, and you saw how easy I pulled that off. Again, the stop bead was there to keep stuff from falling off when it was swinging around, not to like hold tension or anything like that. So the stop bead is gone, pulled it off, and now I've got my thread, and I can treat this just like this one. And I'm just going to weave this down in here, finish up with some 15/0s, and once I've got this woven in there, I am going to get to adding my thread. So adding new thread, now I wove it all in. I already showed you how to do that. You don't need to see it twice, I don't think. Adding a new thread, if you're just going to be adding thread to the end to bring it in to the 15/0 section so that you can glue it into some end caps for a bracelet, then you'll only need about an arm's length, and that's where you hold one end of the thread in one hand and the spool in the other, and hold one to your chest and stretch your arm out, and that gives you an arm's length. If you're going to be doing multiple bobble sections, because you're going to be making it into a bangle and it needs to be a little bit larger than that, then you'll want a whole wingspan when you do this. It doesn't matter like what you're doing next. This part is going to be the same whether you're doing bangle or not. This is just how you add more thread. I'm going to start the same place that I stopped, and I'm going to start with the 15/0s, because that tension of multiple passes of the thread going through the tiny holes is going to be a good anchor for the start of my thread. And then we're going to do the same thing where we follow the thread path, but do some switchbacking in order to create more tension on the thread so it doesn't come loose. And I've just got maybe 2-3 inches hanging out here. I'm just going to pinch it because it's going to move, but we're going to be cutting most of this off. I just want enough that I can hold on to the thread with my thumb while I'm holding on to my work and keep it from coming completely out. I'm not going to be pulling tight on this until I have it secure. So I'm doing the same thing. I started here, and I'm just going to go through some more of these 15/0s. So the point here is that I'm going to be anchoring it down here where the beads are smaller, and then I will weave up into the work to where the beads are larger, and we'll start our pattern again up there. All right, so that's a few of them. See, if I pull on this, the thread's going to come through. That's why we need to have the switchback, the reversal, the reverse uno, to help do that. And just one of them isn't enough. You can see it's still moving. Let me pinch that so it's not going anywhere. So I'm going to have to do another one, and just one more for reinforcement's sake. So I'm going to go all the way back through here. Again, you can tie a knot. There's nothing wrong with tying knots in this sort of thing. And usually in a lot of my projects, I do. I enjoy the security that I feel having a knot. But for this particular project, for this type of project, it's not super necessary when you've got these smaller beads that can help hold your thread where you want it to stay. Like if this was all 8/0s or something like that, and I was doing just a peyote rope, and it wasn't going up and down like that, I would definitely knot it, just because I wouldn't 100% trust the weaving through and all of that. It's just a me thing, by the way. That's a me problem. Right, so I've already done one reversal. Let's see if I can put my needle in this bead here. All right, one more here. And another reversal this way. And now if I pull on this, this thread isn't going anywhere. So I know it's secure. So now I can just follow the thread path up until it's coming out of one of these 8/0s. And again, it doesn't matter which 8/0 in this particular pattern you're coming out of. If you're following a specific pattern, then yes, it is important. But because this is just 3 rows of this, 3 rows of that, 3 rows of this, it's not that important that we come out of a specific 8/0. If it was important, you would do the weaving in of your new thread first and then go back and weave in your old. So I'm just following my thread path, going up through my 8/0s. Now I'm going to go up through my 6/0s. And it kind of makes a diagonal path when I do that. Boom, boom, boom. That's fine. It's just going from each of the beads in the direction that they are meant to be in. And again, see the thread's not going anywhere. All right, so now I'm coming out of this 8/0 and I'm ready to continue my pattern. So let's switch gears and start talking about how you end it if you're going to make it into a bracelet instead of a bangle. And let me grab my cord ends. I'm not actually going to glue this on camera. I'm just going to show you how to do it. I think you guys might, I know I'm assuming knowledge, but you might know how to glue things. They teach us that in kindergarten. And I've just got a couple of different ones that are, their hole is the same size, but just to give you an idea of what it might look like on there. This is a 6mm hole that we've got there. I have some 5mm ones and it didn't quite fit in those. So 6mm is going to be your guy for that. So I've got coming out of my thing and I'm ready to do my pattern. Only when I get down to my 15/0s and I've done my last 3rd row of 15/0s, I'm going to stop and I'll show you that when we get there. So let's do some bead weaving. We're going to start up again, and this is just what you do. You start up again, you do more bead weaving, and I'm going to do the exact same pattern that I have been doing. Okay, let's get that thread on the inside of there. Perfect. Last one. So you see how it doesn't really matter which bead I started with. This is my new start and stop bead for that row. Or sorry, round. And I'm ready to step up into that next row and continue on. So I'm going to continue and keep going until I have 3 rows of 8 O's, 3 rows of 11 O's, and 3 rows of 15 O's, and I will meet you right back here when I have that here on this end. Alright, so I've just added my last round of 15 O's on this end, and I'm going to go ahead and step up. Now, if you are doing the bangle, you would just keep continuing in the pattern. This doesn't apply to you. You can move on. If you are doing the bracelet at this point, instead of me adding an 11-0 and sewing into each of these steppy-uppy bits, instead I'm going to come out of this bead I just stepped up to and go back down into this work, and I'm going to sew around through this whole thing a few times before I cut off my thread. And then after I cut off my thread, I'm going to be left with this little loop right here on the end, and that's going to fit into one of these bead caps. And before I put it into the bead cap, I'm just going to kind of smoosh it so that it fits a little bit better in there. There we go. So before I put it in the bead cap, I'm going to put glue into the bead cap. And the glue that I used for this, and it works great, is some E6000. And I just grabbed a big old glob of this with my one of my spare scrap wires, and I filled it until it was, you know, where this first little ring around the edge of this rim is, until it was just about there but on the inside. And when it was there, then I went ahead and stuck in my little bit, and it's going to cover up all of those 15 O's. You are going to see some 11 O's. It might even cover up some of the 11 O's depending on what size your 11 O's are. But then when you put it on there, give it a little bit of a twist, and then you set it down and you walk away, and you leave it to dry and cure for, I don't know, 24 hours at least before you start attaching your jump rings, like I have here, and clasps to these little loops on the end. I also, just a pro tip, I always put some scrap paper down whenever I'm gluing, and the scrap paper helps because then I can set my work on the scrap paper and then move the scrap paper out of my workspace and out of my area and let that cure. So that is what you're going to want to do if you are doing the bracelet. And for the bracelet, for this one, I have 7 bumps for my bracelet, and that fits my 7.5-inch wrist with a little bit of give. So with an extender chain, it would probably fit an 8-inch wrist just fine. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is 7. So what you want to do is on this end, do the exact same thing. Add enough beads to taper it down and glue it in on the other side, and you'll have a bracelet, a bobbly bracelet. We're going to keep going though because I want to do a bangle. So for a bangle, 9 of these sections will fit over my wrist. Just gonna back off a little bit. And again, I have really, really strong hands because I was a competitive powerlifter. In fact, I was strong before that. I just have always had a lot of muscle in my hands. So my hands might be bigger around than yours. After you get like your 8th bobble on here, I mean 7 might work for you. I don't know your hand size. Then you'll just want to put it along there on your thickest part of your hand. See if they meet, and if they don't, keep going. So I'm going to wait until I get my 9th bobble, and I'm going to wait until I get my 9th bobble started, because if I don't count this one, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then I'm going to want 7, 8, and then just the first 1 row of these beads, because I wanted to use these larger beads for the zip up. Because when you zip it up, it's basically taking the beads and snugging them up like a zipper. So we're going to be zipping those up later. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to add some more bobbles. And when I meet back here, we will make it into a bangle. All right, I am ready to finish this bangle. So one of the things you can do is, as you're going, if you're like, hey, this seems pretty big, this might fit around my wrist, because like I said, I have really big hands. So 9 of these bumps will fit around my wrist, but you might have smaller hands, and then 7 or 8 might be what you'd want. So I'd recommend when you get to like doing your 8th one to go ahead and just check and see. You can hold on to your thread, just hold it there at the thickest part of your wrist or your hand, and bring it around, and that's gonna fit. I'm gonna do one more row of 6/0s and then zip them up. So that's gonna fit. I know that that will fit. So that's how I check to see if it'll fit. You can use a tape measure and then do a tape measurement, but one thing to keep in mind is, because we've got these bumps, it's going to hold the whole thing out a ways. So your tape measurement here will be different from something that's flat against your hand. It's not your wrist measurement, it's the thickest part of your hand that we're trying to measure this with. So if I include this as one bump, that means I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that's enough. I'm gonna finish this bump on this side because I only have 2 rows. If you take 2 columns and count how many beads are in that, I have 2 rows of 6/0s here, and I just finished my 3rd row and stepped up for my 8/0s here. So I'm going to put 1 row of 6/0s on this side. Wherever you join it, you can join it anywhere. I'm just doing it here to make it easier for you guys to see. And if it makes it easier for you to do it this way, then I encourage you to do that. If it's going to be easier for you to zip it up with some of the smaller beads, do the same thing. You're going to be finishing up whatever section you have on this side with these ones. If I had left this side the way it was with the stop bead, where I had started with just 1 8/0 and then I had all of my 6/0s, what I would be ending with is just 2 rows of 8/0s, and then I'd zip it up. Just letting you know that's where you would be for this. But I'm stopping right here because I am 1 row short on that side. If it was the part where we had started, you would want to just do 2 rows of 8/0s and then zip up with the 8/0s. You have options. All right, and it's a good thing that I am almost done, because if not, I would need to add more thread, but this is going to be sufficient thread for the rest of this. So I am right here. I added my first row of 6/0s on this bump, but that's my last row of 6/0s on this bump. So I'm still going to step up. And this part's going to get a little bit tricky because I'm going to want both of these ends to kind of face each other. I'm going to identify my sticky outie beads. Those are the ones that I want. And what we're going to do is we're going to zip these up, and these sticky outie beads are going to fit in between each of these other beads like that. It's going to fit like a puzzle. So you can twist it if you want. I don't highly recommend doing that, but if you want to, or just let it kind of drop, and where it ends, that's going to be its natural place for it to be on the other side of, and then bring this up. This is a little bit loose because I haven't, gone through and tightened it and done another row yet. But I'm going to take my thread, see how it's coming out of this bead here. I'm going to hold this up so that I can see which side of my next bead I need to go into. So I'm coming out of this bead right here. If I'm holding it sideways like this, it's the bottom of that bead. I want to go through the top of this bead on the other side. So this is just so I can hold it and show you at the same time, through the top of that bead on the other side. And then when I hold them next to each other, that's going to put that right there, with that side up against this one. Now coming out of this one, I'm going to sew right into my next blue bead from this side. That's the side I just finished working on. You can hold it on the other side if you want, if it makes more sense for you. But all right, so my next sticky outie bead from the beginning is over here. I'm going to want to sew again in the same direction as I'm sewing in the other ones, because we're just zipping it up. We're going through each of these beads on this end and then this end, one right after each other, to the last end beads for each of them. And this is really loose right now, and that's okay, because all we're doing is getting the beads in place, and when we snug up our thread, it will snug them into place where they need to go. So right here on this one, my next bead here, if you need to move it into the way, or if you need to look at it a little bit different, you could find it. It's going to be this one here, and this is getting difficult to hold. And make sure it's in the camera shot. Hold on. Okay, so we're almost done zipping these. It gets easier as you go through each of them. This was the one we started with, this one here. So I just have one more bead over here on this side. And then I can go back through this one. And that zipped them all up together. I'm just going to turn this over so you can see that it is a little bit loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of those a second time. I'm just going to do a second pass of my needle through all of those beads that I just sewed through here and here, all the way around, just to reinforce it, to tighten this up, because this is where, you know, the two ends join. I don't want that drifting apart while I'm wearing it, or while I'm rolling it over my wrist. And to get this to turn around, I don't know if you caught that, I'm just rotating the whole thing like this, instead of just twisting part of it. I am running out of my thread. I want to make sure I have all of these reinforced. Okay, so now that that's all reinforced, that's pretty good, but I still have my loose thread. So I'm going to do what I did before. I am going to go back down through my work, following my thread path, and I'll do a couple switchbacks. While I'm doing that, change direction, and I want to get to the point where I end my threads here in the 15-0 section. Once I've gone through a few times, that'll mean that this end of my thread is secure, and I can cut this off. Ooh, that was nice and tight, that's good. And then I will have a bangle. So that is how you make a bobbly bangle using 4 different sizes of seed beads, and you see how it fits just nicely right off of that. It's got a little bit of a dangle under here. That's fine. I don't mind a little dangle in my bangle. And then this one, if you don't like it as dangly as this, you can just omit a couple of these sections and glue them into these end pieces like I showed you, and then you'll have a bracelet that is bobbly. But this, I think, is going to be one of the pieces that I make for my full set from the Curated Collection from Beads to Live By. I've got this finished, but I have had this idea poking around in my head for the rest of the Curated Collection for a necklace. And I am going to make a necklace, earrings, and a ring in a separate video for this. And we're gonna have that be like my full set for this Curated Collection. I mean, I had ideas like as soon as I opened it of things that I can make with it and ways that it can go with the bracelet that I have already put together and made. So look for that. That will be probably sometime this week that I do my necklace, earrings, and ring to go with the bangle that we've already made. So I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe you learned something. Let me know if you're going to try making one of these, or if you've already made something like this before. I had a lot of fun breaking this down, figuring out what to make with it, teaching it. I love this. Like, I love the colors. It's really, really gorgeous and beautiful, all of these together. Like this corally color, when you put it right here next to this, it looks like bright copper. Like, that's the vibe that I'm getting from it. So hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you try this, and if you do, let me know how it goes. Hope you guys are having a great day. Bye.